Hey, na, hey, na. Welcome to Star Songs. This is an intermission, and I decided that I would do an intermission between 3 episodes of Star Songs where I bring through information, and this one's just coming from me in the here and now, and I wanted to talk about channeling because I hear lots of different perspectives and different versions of ideas of what channeling is, and I guess I just wanted to talk about my own personal experience of what I perceive channeling to be and how that feels for me. And so when you watch the Star Songs, you have a reference to my own experience and what works for me. And I'm sure it can be very different for other people and how they perceive it. And it can also be a bit of a wishy-washy term sometimes, where people can associate it being quite negative, or can associate it being purely, truth. And I guess I just wanted to kind of nut this out and try to have this conversation or chat around what channeling is. So for me personally, when I am bringing through information and guides, and I'm coming in a place of communicating that information or that expression of being, I recognize that a lot of the time it has to be in resonance with me to begin with. I can't just channel or bring through information about something that I've never had any lifetime or connection with. There are some people that might do that. I don't know. I can't comment on how other people bring through information. But for me, what I understand is the law of the vibrational resonance. So I have to have a vibrational resonance with energies that I'm bringing through. And that can come quite automatically or naturally if I've spent a lot of time working with that energy, or if I've spent a lot of time pondering on things that relate to that, or I've spent time studying or anchoring in through the mind, and then sort of that becoming a natural foundation, and then eventually it becoming part of what allows me to bring through information. So on a personal Natasha experience sense, I can't just bring things through that aren't relevant or aren't resonant as a vibration, as a part of my experience in the here and now. On some level, it has to be, from my experience, everything works in the law, in that sort of law of creation, and all the different layers of law of creations, which is to me law of attraction or law of vibration, where things have to move in resonance with the way in which you've anchored something in. So when I'm communicating concepts around even how I perceive my experience, it has to be from my experience. I can't communicate about something that's just a concept mentally, purely. It has to be anchored in through a practice over time or through experience. And I think that it's a humbling thing to go through experiences, to anchor in your own experiences until a point where it becomes a wisdom. That's you working through the lead to gold process of being humbled until you understand that it was always there, that perfect understanding was always there, but you had to clear away what was not necessarily true for you, or what or Maya or illusion or delusions or anything that could be in the way. They say Lord Ganesh comes through and he is the remover of obstacles. And when you really look at that as an in-depth teaching, when you really see what an obstacle is, it's an untruth, and it's a distortion of the clarity that already exists, that you aren't able to recognize the clarity, therefore you see it as an obstacle, and it is an untruth that is the obstacle. So I guess when it comes to channeling, a lot of my experience is about removing the obstacles, removing the untruths, so I can just allow flow. And I also notice when I bring information through, I don't have preconceived ideas. I try to clear my mind, clear myself, and that is part of why I do prayer at the beginning, and why I do sound at the beginning, is the prayer is to align to the energies in which I am wanting to resonate with and already building in a bridge to connect with. And then the music helps me create a resonance that allows me to be a clear channel in that present moment. And I don't really always like using the word channel, but I don't really know how else to explain it, because it's kind of like, using the word channel can have a lot of different meanings, which is why I felt prompted or nudged to do this video, because there's a lot of different preconceived ideas around what channeling is, and some of it is very, some of it's rooted in untruth or in obstacles. Some of it's rooted in a false sense of connection, a false connection or a false idea of what connection is to the divine, and it can be, delusional in some aspects. So we have to be really, really careful as you walk the fine line in terms of, when I recognize myself as an instrument of God, I recognize it as my responsibility to create a clear pathway in which the aspects of my own higher self and God or prime source can come through and share from that vibration. And to do that, I have to be in resonance with that. I can't just I can channel that through sometimes unexpectedly, but I could be in a really great state and everything is flowing. But if I'm in a not so great state, or if I'm in a lower vibration energetically, I have to build a practice or use a practice to build a resonance to become a clear instrument of God. Like we all do. That's what we're here to experience, whether we have forgotten that or not. So I guess, being born in Solomon Islands, where I talked about that in the intro video, I was, without me realizing, I was exposed to song and dance as a subconscious part of my reality. And then also music was a part of my life as a really young child. As we all have that, music's every part of everyone, because we are sound, resonant with that of God, or resonant with whatever it is that we're focusing on in that moment of time. So music was a big part of that, and because I didn't have to have a lot of language in the usual sense, with my family, yes, but the culture sort of was so encompassing that I was able to receive language and the translation of language in different forms other than just through words. So ceremonial, for example, and love through being touched, being held by a community in different forms, that all taught me how to translate and feel in the presence of. So what I guess I'm really getting to is that, especially I had talked about being more in my right side of my brain, which makes me more fluid and makes me, I don't really have to remove myself from my persona in a left brain kind of compartmentalized way to bring through information. I can just kind of very quickly, as long as I'm in the resonance and I'm in the flow and I've built up a practice that allows me to maintain that alignment, I can bring through that connection. And because I have a reference, you see, my life has shown me I have a reference to that love. Therefore, I can bring it through as a genuine sharing. And whereas some people might not have that type of experience, so it's going to be harder for them. It would take them quite a bit of clearing of the untruths or clearing of the obstacles to be able to bring that type of awareness through. And it's all possible, obviously, but we've got to look at all of the experiences that we've had in this lifetime and where the resonances have been present as little sort of convergences of wisdoms or teachings that maybe not have been realized at the time, but over time there's these layerings that occur that allow you to bring through that information. So I guess I would see channeling really as being in resonance. I would say channeling is, for me, it's being in resonance. I'm either in resonance or I'm not. I'm either in tune or I'm not in tune. If I'm not in tune, that doesn't make it a negative state. It just means that I have a bit of clearing of the untruth or obstacles that require me to move through that to get to a place where I can be in resonance, which is my truth or my expression of being that is more authentic to myself in this here and now. So translation has been a big part of my life, because obviously coming from a culture where language was seen differently and I was experiencing language differently, to moving to a new culture where I had to then also translate what I'd experienced into a new forum, and that wasn't going to be received the way in which I understood things. What I realized wasn't received, it wasn't understood, and it couldn't even be seen. It was invisible. That silence or that wisdom, whatever it is that I had as a part of my experience, couldn't even be seen. So I had to watch everything very closely and learn how to translate my experience in new terms, at 6 years old. And then, I didn't consciously realize, oh yes, I'm translating this at 6 years old, but that's what was happening. Children are constantly looking to translate their experience, and they use it through feeling often. A feeling is how they translate. If it feels good, it feels good. If it feels bad, it feels bad. If you feel good, generally you're in resonance. If you feel bad, you're generally out of tune. And then we start to build these mental habits and conditions and structures as we get older, and then we start to sometimes lose that connection with the resonance of what it is to be a child, for example. So I guess that translating was my survival. It allowed me to survive in a new culture, and I probably felt really out of depth a lot of times. And then I'd keep learning. Because I didn't have a choice. I really had to keep learning about my experience to be able to fit even comparatively into it, even to relate to it. I had to work harder than, say, someone who had been born in that culture. So I'm not using this as an example as if this is some sort of special lifetime. I'm using this as an example as when we look at our lifetime and we look at our experiences and we look at our degrees of experiences within that lifetime, we can see repeating patterns or repeating themes, and we can see what it is that we have come to learn through that. And for me, it's translation. A lot of everything that I'm doing, I'm constantly translating. So when you couple that with, say, someone who is more right-brained, who is more creative, more abstract, doesn't have as much attachment to order in the way that, say, the culture surrounding me does, it meant that I could adapt to different circumstances no matter where I was at. And sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I didn't fit in at all, and I didn't know the appropriate way to adapt. But when you couple that together with then a practice or several practices, and then study building resonance in terms of learning to be able to clear the path so you can understand, say, for example, a practice for me is altar practice, which I've done since I was little. I didn't know that it was called altar practice, but I did it as a way of translating what was coming through as an experience into a creative format. So creativity became my platform to create to create the experience that I was having, that I wasn't able to necessarily communicate verbally with, the beings around me, because I was, different in that sense. So I used art and, altar practice, or making sculptural like things as a way of expressing this, connection with God and this connection with life into my world. So I had a place for it. So when I said in the first intro video, I'm constantly trying to locate myself, it's also, that's part of the translation, when you constantly are translating, sometimes you don't know who you are in that, because you're constantly transforming to adapt to circumstances, and being very right brain, you're already really abstract in the way you think, so you're constantly trying to find ways to adapt to what is perceived as the ordered mind, you know, and the compartmentalization of the mind. And so you start to try to learn all the little compartments so you can then just like switch into them whenever you need to do that, or whenever I needed to do that. I'm not saying that you guys are doing that, but that's kind of how I could explain it. So I feel like that's kind of an important background to understanding why I am bringing through star songs, why this is important for me to express. And you know, when I think back, I was connecting in with beings from a very young age, and a lot of the time that I didn't necessarily have sight the way some people have perfect sight. They can see the beings in front of them, it's clear as day. I didn't really have that. I had a lot of colors and things like that, but I was more clairaudient. So I would hear sounds, I would have conversations telepathically continuously, and I didn't always know I didn't even really know that was clairaudience until even recently. Like I didn't, because my brain doesn't, it's like this. So when you're smelling, and you know, you've been smelling and sensing things through your sense of smell for such a long time, you're not really thinking about the fact that you're smelling. It's just a natural sense. So when you're seeing, you don't think, I'm seeing right now, I'm seeing, you know, you're not seeing for the purpose of just seeing. You're using your sight for all these other things. You're getting your keys, you're finding something around your house. You're not thinking about it in terms of, oh, I've got sight, you know. And then you think about thinking. You're not thinking, I'm thinking right now, you know. So when I was those senses, you know, clairaudience, clairsentience, clairvoyance, they're not necessarily things that when they come natural to you, you think about. You just utilize them as a purpose and as a gift, and they're just a part of the package in which you're experiencing. And so for me, being very right brain, being very creative, I wouldn't need to think about the fact that I was clairaudient. I just knew that I would get the answers, you know, through words or through certain sounds, and I wouldn't really question that. And because I said, you know, earlier on in my life, I had access to kind of a ceremonial music and instrumental, kind of without even realizing it was just part of the foundation. And then, you know, growing up in an island environment where there's no concept of time in the left brain sense, it's about the cycles of nature. So there's all these things that have sort of layered off into my experience, and then they become the foundation that effortlessly, you know, not always, but effortlessly become part of your experience. But then you also get all these untruths or these delusions or these things these concepts that don't really fit to your experience, but somehow through the culture or through society, through your family and projections, you have these fragmentations that sometimes come in as habits or as part of your karmic seeds, you know, the seeds that get planted as part of your creation. And when you get older, hopefully, you know, we start to separate some of these things off and then work out what is really relevant and and transmute a lot of that, you know, that sort of stuff that doesn't really serve us anymore, so we can step onto our soul path. So when I can only really express myself from my perspective when I'm talking like this, you know, I could talk about what channeling is as a general consensus, but I can't tell you what that is. All I can do is express how it is for me. And for me, it is being blank, it is being a void space, it is letting go of any preconceived ideas, which means it's easy for me to do being very right-brained. But if you're very left-brained and you're wanting to bring that through, that means you're really going to have to, you know, clear out a lot of your preconceived ideas around things. And before you even get to a point where you can build a resonance with some of that stuff, you know, and you might need a practice that gives you a flow, you know. So all of these aspects are quite complex, and depending on your personal life experience and the way in which you have interpreted that personal life experiences at any given moment, because we're always interpreting and translating our experience even when we don't realize we're doing it, And if we haven't really alchemized aspects of that experience, then it makes it quite, it means that it just isn't realized yet. There's these gifts that are waiting under the surface of that untruth, or of that, you know, the obstacles, like we talked about with Ganesha. You know, the remover of obstacles is about the remover of untruths that have blocked you from moving into your deeper parts of your true purpose of why you're here in the here and now on earth, you know. So I guess that feels important to express, you know, because I want when people watch star songs, I don't want people thinking these are just like I'm just channeling in some far out concept that doesn't relate to my personal genuine experience. I have to build resonance with that to some degree. It might come through in a really fluid way because I've cleared the path in my own consciousness. I'm, you know, becoming a void space. I'm very right brain, so I can go into the abstract and not feel uncomfortable. You know, sometimes naturally you do. You don't know whether you're saying the right thing. You don't, because you don't have that that same marker that some people are conditioned with, and that could be, you know, that could be a positive thing and can be an amazing thing, but it could also be something where you say something and everyone looks at you weirdly and you're like, oh shit, like, why did I say that? But you're like, oh, it's the truth. Like, I've just got to trust my way of being. But that's not always a nice thing to have. And I've had that quite a lot, you know. I'll just say something that I feel is really true for me and people look at me like, that's not socially acceptable. Why would you say that? So then my left brain's like, take note, like, you know, be aware that when you say these things, people will have odd reactions. Okay. Especially when, you know, one of my realized gifts in terms of the senses, like I said, they're very automatic and natural, is clairaudience. I didn't necessarily even realize this till just recently as a concept, because it was so naturally a part of my experience. But it also, when you look at somebody's natural senses, if they've got a really strong sense of smell, it seems like an exciting thing, but it means they smell everything. You know, if you've got clairaudience, it means that every sound can really like bug you. And, you know, so you don't realize you get mentally overwhelmed by someone making a tapping noise with their pen. You know, to them, it means nothing. It's a rhythm, but to you, it can be like that's too much for me. I can't handle that, because you're hearing it on other levels, and you're having to take in that information on a much more sensitive, in a much more sensitized way. So, and you know, if I think about, you know, my feeling state, I'm very feeling and clairaudient. So feeling is a very strong one for me. You know, I've grown up in Solomon Islands where feeling was very much part of how I operated. There were no rules around expressing feeling, and then moving to a culture where there's a lot of rules around expressing. Oh no, it's not okay to cry here, but it's okay to cry here. If you show that you're upset about this, then that will come back on you through social, you know, unacceptance, or, you know, it just goes into so many different, there's so many rules, and I had to learn all the rules to understand how to appropriately express myself in that compartmentalized kind of reality. So I guess all of those things made me, in some ways, that coming to this culture and then learning how to develop the way my brain was. I know, you know, I was told that I had a learning disability when I was moved to this culture, and I was kept down in grade 2 because I was told that I had a learning disability and I couldn't comprehend my experience. And in a way, I couldn't really comprehend my reality because I'd come from a completely different world. It was like an alien reality to me. And as a child, I probably didn't have the most appropriate communication in terms of conversations at dinner or things like that. So I was having to like do my best to take in, but my brain couldn't perceive the amount of information and the amount of rules. It was too much. So, you know, that then also sometimes pushes you even further into the spectrum of being more right brain, because you can't actually perceive what it is that you're experiencing. So therefore you then kind of create your own reality in a sense, and that's where, you know, it can be a really beautiful thing, but it can also be a delusion. There can be delusion that can be woven into that, because you don't have anywhere to be understood, and you have nowhere where you can land. So, you know, so that clairaudience can become much stronger. That sense of spiritual connection becomes a lot stronger. But then you've got nowhere where anyone is reflecting that reality back to you. So it becomes your own cocoon reality, and then you know, seeds of, you know, like wounding from the outside world can come into that, and there can be all these little layers of things that start to become a part of that, even without you realizing it. So it's very complex. So when I talk about, you know, what we perceive as channeling, to me it's a complex understanding, but I guess the way to simplify it would be, to be a channel, in my experience, you have to have resonance with what it is that you are expressing and the energy in which you're communicating and translating from. You know, if I've got a being coming through and communicating, I don't necessarily see anything. Sometimes it's blank. Sometimes I see very specific scenes, and then I've got to find a way to make that relatable to whoever I'm talking to. And then I'm thinking, this is coming in, and this is another language, and then I've got to translate it to what we perceive as English language, which is a bunch of sounds that make sense to our, you know, logical mind, because we've created rules around the language and all that. And then I've also got to be thinking about who it is that I'm talking to, and how they're going to perceive that. And so channeling is a lot of responsibility if you're really genuinely understanding the process and the flow of that. And it can be quite, there can be a lot of pressure to translate information, and people can be, you know, what we perceive as psychics or channelers, but they can be wounded, and through that wounding, that can mean that they can say and do things that are quite harmful to other people or other beings, by them either not being aware, or them being thinking that they're right because they channel, so therefore that must be true. The thing is, there is a personal responsibility with channeling, because it requires one to be totally in resonance with themselves on a higher level. And if there's wounding, and grounded as well, and if there's wounding, then that wounding will find a way to come through, and it will find a way to come through in the language, whether it's through you know, verbally, whether it's through, like, there's all these different aspects of ways, or vibrationally, that gets translated verbally. So when I think about channeling, I'm receiving a vibration and I am transmitting a vibration. There's an exchange going on, and when that's occurring, I then have to translate the vibration into sound, and that sound is known as English language. That then becomes, I then also have to think about where it's heading and what is the purpose? What is the purpose of what I'm saying? Because I could say a bunch of things to anybody, but is it really relevant? Is it relative to them? Is it supportive to the bigger picture? Or is it actually just creating more confusion for them? So that there's a huge responsibility in my understanding and my experience. There's a huge responsibility in being someone who translates information, and communication is a huge responsibility. It is really where we start to bring our inner world into our outer world, and how that looks, and whether that's effortless or whether that's graceful or whether that's clunky. That is really where the it's like a transformation kind of center our throat. You know, we're not only receiving input and learning how to translate that with our perceptions, but we're expressing things that we've perceived from the outer world, and maybe we haven't mulled them over enough, and then we're starting to just say things. You know, I've had, as someone who is quite, you know, gentle and loving kind of presence, I often have had a lot of people project onto me and tell me, you know, and they'll be psychics or they'll be channelers, and they're like, you are this and you are that, and they start just sledgehammering these concepts onto me. And I just have to remember, I'm just a blank canvas. It's okay, I can let it go. And I have to translate their lack of awareness into something that helps me not take on these concepts or these ideas that aren't necessarily always relative to my growth and my development, because that being might have wounding, and they don't even know that what they're saying is not necessarily, they don't even know maybe anything about my life, and they just feel it is within their right to just say something really heavy going. And I try to see communication and language as a sort of, it's like balancing, it's like Jesus walking on water, you know, it's like to walk on water, you have to be graceful, and you have to be able to recognize that every ripple you make on the water has to be so gently expressed and brought through that there's a real awareness around every step that you take when you're communicating. And I'm not, you know, I am having a human experience, so I would have definitely misunderstood or misinterpreted or said something that wasn't necessarily relative to someone. And I always, you know, usually at the end of each day, I assess and I scan through the day, and I scan through, and then if I find areas in myself that I realized came out that weren't really relative to them, or maybe I didn't understand why that came out. It's not that I don't want to control what comes through in that sense, because when we start to control everything, we stop, you know, allowing ourselves to flow. But it's recognizing in ourselves as a self-honesty practice where we have, you know, maybe overstepped the mark. And when I feel that that has happened, my first instinct, once I've dealt with it within myself and addressed it, is to usually go to the person or express to the person or the being, you know, where I felt that that wasn't necessarily relative to them. And that's not always necessary, but in some situations it is, because it helps clear the path and it removes the untruths and it rectifies. If you create a problem, say for example, you throw a whole bunch of garbage out of your car in the middle of a main road, that becomes a problem for all the other cars driving through. And so we've got to remember that every word we speak and every form of communication in terms of what we perceive as even, you know, communication in terms of everyday language, but also especially in channeling where people are looking up to you to communicate things, you know, we've got to think about it. Are we actually leaving a bunch of garbage on the road for other people to have car accidents or accidents around, or then get really tripped up around? You know, we have a huge responsibility with our throat chakra, and I really wanted to lay this down, I guess, as a part of the foundation of Star Songs, is from my own personal perspective and experience, and really hold that accountability over the way in which we use language and the way in which we receive language and how that translation occurs. So I hope that this has been helpful in some way to people, because I know some people say to me, you know, how do you channel? And I don't really ever know how to answer that question, because I'm usually so blank. Like, I'm like, oh, and I don't have to think about it. It's like riding a bike. Like, how do you ride a bike? Once you've learnt to do it, it's just a part of you and it just comes naturally through. But when I look at it, a lot of it has been rewriting, writing journals, rereading, listening to myself over and over again, to the point where I could see where I'm, you know, weeding things out. It's a lot of editing and a lot of clearing, you know, to get to a place where you can effortlessly, or perceivably effortlessly and gracefully pass on, you know, messages. And there has to be a deep understanding, from my experience, there has to be a deep understanding of love on a feeling level. It can't just be a mental concept. You know, you really do have to be in a resonance of love vibration, from my perspective, to communicate in a graceful sense. And so at times, if you don't feel like you're in the resonance of love, you're better off not communicating. You're better off not saying anything. You're better off pulling yourself back and waiting till you're in the right resonance to express yourself. So that's kind of something that's come through quite strong the last couple of weeks, that I had to do this video. And I wanted to do, you know, an intermission and then 3 star songs, an intermission and 3 star songs. So there's this sort of touchdown point between 3, you know, where I'm bringing through that information, and then there's a touchdown point where people can actually anchor in and start to understand what it is that they're experiencing. So I'm creating a context for the work that I'm, you know, passing through or in the presence of. This might not be relative to everyone else, and that's okay. So I hope that's helpful. I hope that's useful. If anyone has any questions or, you know, around this topic, I can do a video in the future around this 4 star songs as another intermission around channeling. But I just felt like I needed to lay that foundation down to help give a really clear perspective of what it is that you know, is happening through all of this. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your support and your presence and your listening and your translating and your patience in terms of receiving these beautiful transmissions or connections with the many different expressions of being in the here and now. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.